Warning, the podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, the murder of Joseph Trevor Dilger, Part 4 of 4. So I have to ask, you now have Christy telling her story, Jeremy not so much. Who brings in Justin? Do you take old trusty helper here, or do you go get him?
No, I think the fire department and brought him in to be interviewed the following day after we had already talked to Christy, and we had enough to go ahead and charge him with the arson and abuse of a corpse. They brought him in, and Chris and I interviewed him.
Chris, how'd you get him?
Well, so I remember talking to Tim, and we actually went and looked for him that night, and we're not successful. We went to his mom's house, couldn't find him. Went to his girlfriend's house over off of Windburn Drive, couldn't find him. So we decided to reconvene in the morning, and we would go to the girlfriend's house to see if he was there. And I remember Tim telling me, he said, "You've got a good rapport with this guy. Go over there and see if you can just get him to come in." So myself, a couple other fire investigators went over to his house. We had a couple of homicide detectives with us, but they stayed back. And basically, I asked him, I said, "Hey, I need you to come down to headquarters, and I want you to give your statement again and tell me what's going on, because it's not making sense." And because we had a decent relationship, it seemed like, he willingly got in the police car, and it was a homicide detective vehicle, was not a marked police car, and we drove down to the police headquarters.
So he's thinking he's still going to get this money off this lawsuit of this grill, huh?
I think that was a possibility.
One thing to add to that was the reason we wanted to get him that night was because Christy Hanley was a family member of his, and we didn't want him to catch wind that she's been detained for this homicide. And of course he would have put two and two together, or at least I would have hoped he would have. but that proved not to work. But I still don't know if he even knew that next morning that she was arrested.
Well, when you went looking for him, Chris, that night prior, did you just say, "I just want to check up on him and see how his burns are doing," or would you tell the family?
Another investigator, I believe it was Lieutenant Blanton, talked to his mom over at her place off Northland, just nonchalantly said, "We just need to talk to him again." Again, didn't want to raise any red flags, but wanted to just basically have him explain his story again to us, because we wanted to get him down to headquarters, because at this point we had enough to place charges for arson.
Do you think she had maybe called after you left to tell him you're all looking?
Oh, I'm sure she did.
So you go tomorrow and you say, "I want to bring you down so we can talk about this." And he just comes.
Yeah, he came willingly. He really didn't appear nervous. And on our way down, we talked small talk, learned a little bit about him, where he went to school. He worked for Golf Tent as a side job, and just kept it calm. Didn't want to spook him, but I wanted to talk to him, because again, now we had Christy saying what she was saying to the homicide detectives. So we wanted to get his statement and see if he would admit to setting the fire.
So he comes in, and are you there, Tim?
Yes.
And so what happens? Chris, you bring him in, and you tell him that somebody's going to talk to him about his injuries?
Well, no, actually, I went in as a second with Chris because he had a rapport with him. So if you ever seen one of our homicide or interview rooms, you got a desk, and the suspect sits on one side of the desk or facing the interviewer. And Chris sit there and read him his rights and told him, he's going to interview him about this. And then I sat kind of in the back of the room just listening to what was being said.
Chris, did he ask you, "Why are you reading me my rights on a burn?"
No, he was willing to talk. He signed the paperwork, and we just explained, "Hey, we're just going to, talk to you, but because you are in this police facility, we have to, Mirandize you." So we Mirandized him, and he agreed to talk to us. And I just started out the questioning again. I just wanted him to I wanted to build a little bit of a time between us Mirandizing him and us getting to the nitty-gritty questions. So I had him explain again. He explained the whole story again on how he burned his arm. And pretty much was the same thing he had said.
So we're back to the pork chops and hot dogs again.
Yeah. And the lighter fluid and where he got the lighter fluid, and are we sure it was lighter fluid? Could it be anything else? And he said, no, it was lighter fluid, and how much he poured on there. And he went through the whole story again.
So then at what point does the shoe drop and you switch gears from the Labor Day cookout to we have this victim?
I do remember saying something to the effect of, Justin, I've been in the fire service for over 25 years, and I know how you burned your arm this is bullshit. It didn't happen this way. I know that for sure. And I remember Tim, it wasn't long after that, asking if it was gasoline. And
but still no mention of Trevor.
Not at that point. And then I think as the interview progressed and we realized that he's not going to come off of it. He's never going to come off of it. We're going to have to feed him along. Hopefully he will catch on to what's going on. We started giving him bits of information about what we knew, about the burn and then how he got burned. And he still would not come off of it.
So you're all believing one thing. He's still sticking to this grill with the lighter fluid. At what point do you just finally say, look, we know Christy and Jeremy Ston told us. We know. You might as well just tell.
Well, we did that, and he still lied and still would not give us anything. And in fact, I think he asked for an attorney.
Yeah, the interesting thing, before he asked for the attorney, because Tim had mentioned something that we had information from Christy that puts him at the scene. He's responsible for this fire. And then Tim had said something to the effect of, did you use gasoline? And he said the word no, but he shook his head in a yes, in an agreement. Mm-hmm. And I think it was right after that he asked for an attorney.
Yep.
So the interview stops, but do you detain him that night?
No, he was under arrest. He was detained. He was charged, and then he went to the Fayette County Detention Center, which gets interesting.
Well, let's hear.
He goes to the detention center, and we have the ways of listening to jail calls when someone gets there and when they're actually in a pod. So one of his first phone calls is to a family member of his, and they want to know why he's arrested, what happened. And he's explaining to him that he didn't do what we're accusing him of, and he didn't burn a car, he didn't cause any of this. And then the person on the other end of the line kept pressuring him, like, well, how'd you get burned? You didn't get those burns by a grill or whatever. And then he tells them, well, I got them by what they said, burning that car. And then that other person on the line he was talking to was like, oh, don't say anymore, don't say it anymore. But he'd already said it, of course, and that was recorded. Yeah,
let's go back, because this is cool, too, that on listening to the jail calls, just like I talked about how you get a warrant for the cell phones, that the listeners need to understand that you're legally listening to these conversations, and tell everybody what makes it legal, because this is the part that just astounds me.
Well, when you're incarcerated, you don't, when you're making phone calls, we're allowed to listen to them, and you're allowed to read their letters that are coming in and open up their mail, because that's a security issue. Things can lead from a phone call, can lead into something else, information that they're talking about doing in the jail or outside of the jail, or even letters. So by law, we're able to get on this on the jail's phone call system and listen to their jail calls, as well as the jail does it too for security purposes, because you have to pay attention to what's going on inside the jails.
Isn't there a message, though, when they start the call? That's what I'm getting at. This is the best part.
Yes, and there's a message that tells the listener and the person talking that this jail call is being recorded and that we can listen to it. And they, over time, I don't know what it is, but they still talk on them. They still say stuff. And that's exactly what he did, because the other person on the phone just kept pressuring him. And I think he just, you forget. They can only talk for 20 minutes. And then after, 5 or 10 minutes into the phone call, he's probably just forgot. And
were you listening when that happened, or did somebody contact you?
No, I think we all kind of come across it at the same time because I think we were all listening. You don't get to listen real time. Typically, it's after the call is ended, and then you can go back and pull up calls that happened.
So somebody told you all that he's received a call?
No, that's one of the first. Whenever I arrest someone, that's one of the first things that I do is after I've arrested them and send them to jail, whether or not they told me anything or not, I get on the jail phone calls and start listening to their jail phone calls to see what they're going to talk about. And you'll be surprised how many times they will give you more information. They're giving someone else information about the crime that they committed. And that's just something that you have to do as a detective. You have to listen to these jail calls because 9 times out of 10, they're going to give some information.
Yeah, they'll be telling people what to do with evidence. Like, I need you to go here and pick this bag up, or that gun that I gave Johnny, that's got to go. I mean, but I think, again, what's just ironic is that at the beginning of the phone call, there's no doubt that somebody's going to hear what you're saying. And like you said, Tim, they just go right on. Thank God.
So do you rush out and call Chris?
I think we all came across it pretty much around the same time. We all started calling each other, hey, we got this jail phone call. And he's like, oh, I got it too. So I think all of us had been listening to some of their to his jail phone calls the following day.
Another interesting thing about the jail phone call is he admitted to obviously being out there, but he initially stated that he didn't set the fire. And the female that he was talking to asked the question, well, how are they going to know you're out there? And that's when he mentioned that he had thrown his hat out there.
Mm-hmm.
So he not only admitted to being out there and that his hat was out there. And that's how I came across discovering the hat about 500 feet away, was based on the jail phone call where he admitted that he was out there and that he had left evidence there.
Fantastic corroboration of scene evidence by the suspect. Pretty good stuff.
What kind of idiot leaves evidence? I'm just thinking, why did you leave your hat and the lighter? Why? I guess they don't think, do they?
Though we hope they don't think.
Yes.
I mean, you're leaving a hat. Like, potentially DNA could be pulled from it if there's hair in it, or at this point, 2016, I know we've gotten touch DNA by then, surely, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
So why would you leave something that's been on your person out there?
Well, I mean, I think that under the circumstances, I mean, he's a ball of fire and he's running. He doesn't know what to do. I mean, I think that's probably what the witnesses out there heard, was probably him screaming and someone else screaming because he lit this car on fire. He's burning, and Christy or whoever else is screaming too because he's on fire.
That'll get you screaming. You know, his best shot was people getting greedy with marshmallows and sticks and putting him out by accident, but I guess he didn't get that lucky.
No such luck. So do you all then go back to him and say, we need to bring you back in this interview room because we've done heard this call?
No, he lawyered up and we had enough. I mean, we had Christy explaining to us what happened, and then he's on the jail phone calls admitting to setting this car on fire. So there was nothing else we were going to get from him. And he wasn't charged with the murder, and he was only charged with the arson and the abuse of a corpse.
One of the interesting things that we kind of touched on earlier, but we talk about evidence that's corroborating the shell casing that we found in the burned vehicle. FSU sent those for ballistic testing, and those shell casings, based on the ballistics information, further matched the shell casing that they found at the end of August that helped to bring in Jeremy and Christy.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, we do at Lexington is, whether it's right, we have a good rapport with the ballistics guys in Frankfurt. And sometimes you can take a ballistic up there, a shell casing, and say, hey, does these look like they came from the same gun? Now, he can't do a report on it. You have to actually send it in, and he'll do the actual ballistics, and it has to go through peer review. But sometimes he'll look at it and go, this was fired from the same gun. But I can't put anything on paper because it has to go through peer review, proper procedure. But sometimes in a they will do that a little bit, and we use that a lot sometimes. But in this particular case, we had looked into that as well.
Yeah, as long as you followed up with a like a real exam or anything.
Real
but I see where
exam.
you're going is you're getting ahead of time with
Getting
that.
ahead of time because it takes so long sometimes, but they can give you an idea of what kind of gun you're looking for. You know, you got a 380, they might be able to give you something that you can kind of look for, but we still have to go through the proper procedure of getting it done correctly.
So then there's the trial. And what ends up being charged on Jeremy, Christy, and Justin?
Well, Justin, I can say for him, it was arson in the second degree, which is a Class B felony, abuse of a corpse, and maybe tampering with physical evidence.
And Jeremy was charged with the murder as well as the tampering with physical evidence. And I think he was also charged with the arson because they all acted together in the arson.
And Christy?
And Christy was charged with the arson, tampering with physical evidence. And Christy was not charged with the murder, just Jeremy, because he was the one that actually shot and killed him, you know, according to her statement, and then later corroborated that he was in the car, she was driving, and he shot him acting alone.
So some 5 years later, we just came upon the 5-year anniversary. Is Jeremy, Christy, and Justin still in prison?
Jeremy is in prison, and then Christy and Justin are out. They took a lesser. They were neither one of them were charged with the murder. Charged with lessers to include the arson and the tampering with physical evidence. And Jeremy is still in prison.
Yeah, that's that frustrating part about it is that unfortunately that's where it rolls and works sometimes, but I don't think any of us are crazy about that. I'd be hard pressed. There were probably the people back when I was in the unit that I charged, I could probably count on in one hand how many of them are still housed. It would be nothing to run through town and bump into them. But unfortunately, on Chuck Williams, the Gerald Shipman, the guy that lit the fire that killed him and injured his friend so severely because he almost lost his life in that. He's been out for a few years now, and it really frustrates you. That's the hard part of this, accepting where that ends up, and that you could bump into him at a store in a couple of weeks.
So after they all went to prison, did either of you stay in touch with the families, the mother and father?
I have not. I haven't spoken to them for several years. Of course, I've been gone from the Lexington Police Department for a little over a year, or not over a year, under a year. But I haven't spoke to them. I spoke to them during the time that they were incarcerated until it was ultimately going to go to trial. But I haven't talked to them since.
Chris, have you?
I talked to his dad. It was about this time last year. His dad brother was a good friend of mine. Trevor Dilger is the brother of, and so I ran into Trevor's dad about a year ago, and to be honest with you, he thanked Tim, spoke very highly of Tim and the fire department, and seemed somewhat relieved that we were successful in putting at least Jeremy in jail and Sloan as well, Justin as well.
Interesting point here was once Jeremy did go to jail here at Fayette County Detention Center, it wasn't long after he was down there that he couldn't not talk about what he had done. And we had an inmate that came forward wanting a deal, obviously, on charges that he had, but he had good information that Jeremy had talked to him about the homicide and exactly what happened, and it was pretty much spot on as to what Christy had told us as well.
Did anything ever turn up on that Memphis warrant?
No, I think what ended up happening was it was recalled.
Gotcha. Maybe because he was housed up here,
Mm-hmm.
and that post conviction stuff is still pretty important, because there's appeals and things like that, and just because a case has been laid to rest and adjudicated doesn't mean that you don't collect that stuff. Same thing happened in that murder of Alex Johnson, is that Kristen Flum did a fantastic 8-part series called Taking Alex. We plug that every time we get a chance because she knocked it out of the park. In her, I don't know if you've had a chance to listen or the listeners have, but in her investigation while she was producing that podcast, she found a few post-conviction things that were incredible. Just stumbled across them. faked affidavits for his release and stuff, and actually found in Governor Bevins, his big scandal with letting lots of bad people out of prison after he left office, there was actually a commutation or some kind of form that was set that he never signed for the guy that killed Alex Johnson. And she stumbled across that, if I remember correctly. So post-conviction stuff, still good. Still got to get it. It's hot stuff. So let me ask you this, because y'all worked real close together. Were there any lessons learned in this? Anything that, not that you would necessarily do differently, but was there anything that stood out about the investigation that spoke to you?
I think the thing that stands out the most to me is Lexington Fire Arson has to have a good rapport with Lexington Police Department. We worked regularly with the detective unit, homicide, actually quite a bit, burglary, residential, commercial, and even the finance fraud department. So auto theft. So that relationship that we had is extremely important if we want to be successful. If Tim and I didn't work together, or we didn't work together with them, then there would have been information that was missed. And it wouldn't, the entire story wouldn't be as clear, which when you start talking about proving it to a grand jury, to the jury, it has to be very clear, or they may come back with a not guilty. So yeah, I think the big thing for us is to continue that networking between Lexington Police and Lexington Fire and work extremely well together, just to keep that solvability to a successful level.
Yeah, one of the things that we all knew that we had a common goal, and we've always known that, and we always worked well together, and that's what we did in this case, because we'd all come into a room and we'd sit down and talk about what needed to be done, and video. Fire guys were going out and looking for video just like we were. No one had a problem with doing anything because we all knew that we had a common goal. I think over the years, the running joke there for a little bit, I've worked so many arsons with you that I was going to go get my arson certification, because we've had several that we've worked together, it seems like, over the years.
It's a huge crime that I don't think goes reported very often. In tragic circumstances like this, where it folds into a murder, it gets people's attention. But we could probably do, and maybe we should do, just something on serial arson, and because it's incredible how many people. And I think, too, it's like a lot of other crimes where people come up with pet names for it, like a Tommy Torch or a firebug, and they make fun of it. But the reality of arson is, the danger is that if it's a dwelling or a building with people in it, we got that. But it's always stuck with me that somebody's coming to put that fire out, and whoever's coming to put that fire out is at extreme risk. Because I'll tell anybody that asks that I never wanted to be a fireman, and because I am not running into that. And I mean that sincerely. It terrifies me. And so that's the thing about arson, is that a lot of people want to write it off with pet names, and they don't think it's a big deal, but it's a near miss every time. In my opinion, every fire that you have that is set is a near miss, because anything can go wrong to whoever those people are to come to put that out. So it's an important thing. And maybe we can come back and talk about arson serial cases, because those are terrifying.
Yeah, that's a good point, because even if it's an accidental fire, we still have firemen running down the road and going into this building to either rescue somebody, to extinguish the fire, or whatever. And every minute that goes by, you're beginning to put the integrity of the building in a position where collapse is imminent. So yeah, I mean, it's even ramped up more when it's an arson, because that individual or individuals, they don't care about anything. An accident is one thing, an accidental fire, but when it's criminal in nature, they don't care about the responders. They don't care about anybody. So yeah, it puts our guys at risk when they shouldn't be put there. So
I agree. And you all hit it great on teamwork too, because the entire time I'm listening to the collaboration, the common goal. And then probably one thing that hit me too is the amount of humility that everybody had. Because when you said you took second seat to Chris in the interview room, that's to me is the gold in teamwork. Is that when somebody looks over and says, "Hey, the objective here is to get to the truth, to see if we get a charge on that, and to set any kind of pride aside or anything." Because some people They get prideful over that. I don't think I saw it a lot at work, but I've seen it on TV. I mean, there's a couple people on First 48 that I wouldn't work for $100 million, but because you can see the lack of humility. But the idea that we step aside, or you all stepped aside and said, Chris has the rapport, he runs up front on that. And then again, I hope the listeners caught how gracefully you all wandered into that conversation. That's the art, right? Mm-hmm. Is that you just don't bang that out there with an accusation right off the bat as you work your way into it. So great teamwork.
Chris, now, as we are nearing closing, you now have a company yourself. Why don't you tell us and our listeners a little bit about that in case someone is seeking these services? Tell us about your company.
Okay, thanks for asking. So I retired Lexington Fire Investigator in October of 2020. I was an arson investigator from 2012 to 2020, so 8 years. But with my degree, I also worked on the private sector side as a part-time job coming through the fire department. And then after I retired, I had worked for this company named Matrix Investigation Group. And the company was started by a couple of retired firefighter arson investigators. And they have gotten to the point where 18 years was about enough for them. So to me, the timing was perfect. They offered me the ability to purchase the business, and they continue to work for me. So I bought the business in January. The business is private investigation. It's a little bit different. In a nutshell, the big thing between a public sector and a private sector, the public sector is it a crime? And if so, who did it? And we're going to charge them. In the private sector is, did a product fail, or who's going to pay for the damage? So that's the big thing between the public sector and the private sector. So I bought the business in January. There's 6 of us that investigate across the Commonwealth. Our primary clientele is insurance companies that we investigate to determine origin and cause. And again, if there's a product failure, what's the product that failed? Identifying that and bringing in additional engineers to determine if the failure is the product, and then potentially they may be paying for the claim that's caused this amount of damage. So yeah, the business is great. Again, it's Matrix Investigation Group, and we do investigations across the Commonwealth for insurance companies.
Do you all have a web page or a way that people could reach you in the event they wanted to obtain your services? Yeah,
the easiest way is the website is matrixgroup1.com, and that's a website that you can look at what we provide. You can look at our team. We have bios on there, and we have a ton of experience ready to go to work and work for these individuals.
Is that the spelling one or the number one?
It's the number one, Matrix Group 1.
Okay, great. So if anybody should need your services, we know that Chris is your guy, even if it is getting a legitimate claim on a grill, right?
That's correct.
And Tim, in closing, tell us about you. You said you left less than a year ago. What are you doing now?
Well, I retired in June of this year. I knew when I was retiring that I was going to go to the Fayette County Public Schools Police Department. That's where I'm at now. I got hired on there. I started August 2nd, so I had a little bit of time off in between jobs. But I'm a police officer with the Fayette County School Police now, and it's different, but it's very enjoyable because you see a different style of policing. You get to be around children every day, and hopefully that one day you can mentor them and maybe change their thinking on police and just be there for them and show them a different style. And then maybe one day that, if you save that one child, then you've accomplished something. So that's where I'm at, and I'm enjoying every minute of it. And hopefully I'll be there for quite some time.
And I'll shout out too, because that's a great group of people. You landed well. Chris, you did good buying a company and doing it. And, we all have partnerships when we're working. One of my favorite ones was with Chief Martin Schaefer and the rest of the crew out of that school system. They were amazing and still are. So you landed good.
I think so.
You're in a good spot.
Well, gentlemen, thank you all so much. It does really, I never thought about the two industries working together. And Chris, it seems that you and Tim did a great job at doing that and bringing Mr. Dilger's killers to justice and again, you hate that he went down that path, that he even encountered these people, but great job on both your parts. And thank you all so much for taking your time to come share your story with us.
Thank you. It was an honor. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you all too. And one thing I just want to talk about, and Wendy briefly touched on, and I hit it early on, is that it's sad that Trevor was dealing with the struggle that he was dealing with. And we talk about that in terms of risk factor, because the reality of it is I don't think there's too many people that can't look at their own families and find instances where somebody is dealing with that. So we talk about that with the greatest amount of compassion. And again, the double tragedy is that when he was murdered, his hope and his family's hope of him turning that around, and he could have, because people do, extinguished with all of that. And that it just adds to the insanity of taking his life like that too. So thank you all again. If we come up with some other cases, we need to get together and talk about them. I think we talked offline about some more arson cases. And, and again, Chris, I think that maybe a thing on some serial offenders, because again, even if, we focus on death investigations in this, but the near miss to me is just as important. And that's what those are. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, which is our website, and it has show notes for imagery and audio and video files related to the cases you're going to hear. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and YouTube, which has closed caption available for those that are hearing impaired. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or wherever you download your podcast from. Subscribe to the Murder Police Podcast and set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.